So the issue of race, and then you think of particularities in terms of race, in terms of whites and people of color, it's actually complex and foundational and constitutive. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But when you have a sense of normalcy in society, then you notice what's not normal. So if we think about disabilities, which actually I don't like that term, but if we think about disabilities, we notice people with disabilities. We don't notice people who don't have disabilities. Those people are considered normal. So there's one group of people who are normal that are not noticed, another group of people who are not normal who are noticed. In a Christian society, we don't notice Christians, but we notice Muslims, we notice Buddhists, we notice Hindus. So in our society, the way race has worked is that the normativity is around whiteness. So white people in our society more or less think of white people as just normal, just individuals, just folks. And then we notice people who are different. We actually will say we want a diverse person, meaning really we want a non-white person. All of us have a race to the extent that we have race, and it's all relational. There's no normal. I'm a vegetarian. I was in line one day, getting ready to get something to eat, and I asked the person serving if they had lasagna, and I said, "Is this lasagna vegetarian?" And the person's response was, "This," meaning the meat lasagna, "is the normal lasagna, and this is the vegetarian." And I said, "There's no normal lasagna. There's vegetarian lasagna and there's meat lasagna, but there's no normal lasagna." So that's what I mean. And so the notion in terms of in our society we notice increasingly when people of color show up, because in a sense they're not normal. The country was predicated on a certain set of white ideals and white beliefs. And I don't mean white in terms of skin color. Race is not skin color. Race is a set of sociological concepts that get lodged into our body. But it's been organized around a certain concept of whiteness that's now being challenged. One of the things about being a person of color in the United States is invisibility. Now, earlier we talked about people of color being noticed, but being noticed is not the same as being seen. So people of color are noticed, and we're noticed often when we are places we're not supposed to be, whether it's in a shopping center, whether it's in a upper middle class white neighborhood, or whether it's in a mindful meditation center. And we get noticed but not seen. People need to be seen. And to really see someone requires, South African have an expression for seeing someone. They say to see someone, you have to not only see them, you have to see their ancestors, you have to see their family, and you have to see their unborn lineage. I gave a talk, and I was talking about in a class where I would teach about the taking of Native American land, and my white students would say, with some disgruntlement, "Why do we have to study Native Americans? This is not a class about Native Americans." And I would say, we're not studying Native Americans, we're studying America. We're studying our own culture. Our culture is about the appropriation of our land. Our culture is about slavery. So we study the Declaration of Independence, we study the Revolutionary War. We don't really want to study slavery. We've had a number of states in the country recently that are saying, you can't even teach slavery in this classroom because it makes people feel uncomfortable. Now I would say, which people are you talking about? You're not talking about black people. They're saying you can't teach about the taking of land from Mexico because it makes people feel uncomfortable. Which people are you talking about? You're not talking about Latinos and Mexican Americans. But more importantly, in some respects, you're actually not simply taking out the history of Latinos or the history of blacks or the history of Native Americans. You're taking away American history. And so people are aggressively trying to hold on to this narrow sense of what it means to be an American. there's different ways of thinking about information, knowledge, wisdom. They're all different. We could even step back one step more and say there's data, there's information, there's knowledge, and there's wisdom. So the collection of data is certainly not wisdom. The collection of information is certainly not knowledge. And I would say the collection of knowledge is certainly not wisdom. That, at least to me, wisdom is actually understanding and embodying knowledge in a certain way so that it actually has a lived expression. And I think that's one reason that in many societies we associate wisdom with age. There are certain things you just can't skip over. Reading about something in a book is not the same as living it and attaching not just a cognitive piece with it, but the heart piece with it, the experiential piece with it. And I think in all experiences are almost always ambivalent. Something happens. Was that good or bad? In the speed of the moment, we actually oftentimes don't realize that experiences are ambivalent. We think they come with, a tagline. That was a bad experience. Well, why was it a bad experience? Because something happened. To be able to sort of slow down, to me, a lot of contemplative practice is about slowing down, noticing, and being present. Letting stuff in that normally is not welcome. It's like looking at, if not seeing the unconscious. It's like experiencing subtlety in ourselves and others. And the more we can experience that, and the more we can live with that, the more likely we are to inhabit wisdom. And it also seems to me that knowledge has a harder edge. It's like very definite. I know X, Y, and Z. Wisdom to me is much broader, but it also has a softer edge. It's like, maybe, not sure. And to actually be willing to actually be comfortable in the not knowing and not being sure. There's no way of bottling it up, right? There's no way of, you can't go to the store and buy it. So a judge can be wise or not. A teacher can be wise or not. A parent can be wise or not. There are different schools and different expressions. So law aspires to be something which it can never be. And oftentimes law aspires to be something that's not even positive. Like, I want to be objective. That sounds good. It's not possible. It's not even necessarily desirable. When we talk about sometimes being colorblind, it sounds like a good aspiration. The mind science tell us it's not possible, certainly in our society. And I would say it's not necessarily even desirable. So law pushes people in a certain direction. It sort of pushes people into, if you think about advocacy, it's a contest. It's intellectual gladiators, two sides fighting each other in a skillful battle, not for truth. What are they fighting each other for? To win for their client, to win. That's the game. And a bunch of rules. So within that, no, there's not wisdom. But there are parts of it that are actually quite wise. For example, there's something called the theory of big numbers, which is the more information you collect and looked at collectively, the more accurate it would be. So you look at, if you're doing an experiment and you look at 2 people, it doesn't tell you very much. You look at 1,000 people, the reliability becomes very high. So when you take 12 people and put them on a jury and tell them and give them the kind of support, their ability to actually make decisions is actually quite remarkable. And it's sort of playing on the wisdom that the whole is different than the sum of its parts. Now they have to get the right support, and you can't have a jury necessarily of all people with the same biases, which is why sometimes in race cases having all white juries is very problematic. But if you constitute a jury right, give it the right support, it actually leans in the way of wisdom. Well, whoever thought of that? So the law thinking about that was pretty wise. So I don't think the law, in a sense, is a special avenue to wisdom. In fact, I think oftentimes it's the opposite, because my children, when they were younger, they used to ask me, what do you need to do the work that I do, and why wasn't I more depressed? I don't tend to be very depressed. And I say, to do this work, you need three things. You need hubris. You need the willingness to take on things that someone would say completely crazy. To take hubris, actually say you're going to try to make the world a better place. You know, when you're saying that when you're 15, that's one thing. When you're saying when you're 45, it feels quite different. It's like, well, you should have grown up. You know, stop chasing windmills. So you need hubris. You also need humility. So even though you're willing to take on big things, you're willing to be wrong, you're willing to listen to other people, you're willing to learn. You need both of those things. And you need love. You really need to care about people, about life, and about those you want to be in relationship with. And if you have one or two of those, it's not good enough. You need all three. And I feel like law oftentimes just has hubris. Oftentimes it doesn't have humility, and almost never has love. And when you have all three of those things, and you hold on to them for long enough, I think you're likely to stumble upon wisdom.